In the last um, in the last piece that I did, the last part of our lecture that we talked about, I introduced this idea of Baldwin being interested in the artist and trying to understand the artist and trying to make sense of the artist. And he chooses to do so from the perspective of a brother who is not an artist. Um, and there's a moment in the story that is worth just looking at really closely and hearing how this conversation unfolds. And it's a very, very interesting one. And I thought it worth just looking at it. They're discussing it, and but there's a point at which now his brother is actually getting the idea that he can talk to Sonny about what he's going to do with his life. And he says he's interested in music, and of course Sonny says he's interested in music, and so the brother then says, "You mean you want to be a drummer?" And Sonny says, "I don't think," he said, looking at me very gravely, "that I'll ever be a good drummer, but I think I can play a piano." I frowned. I'd never played the role of the oldest brother quite so seriously before, and scarcely ever, in fact, asked Sonny a damn thing. I sensed myself in the presence of something I didn't really know how to handle, didn't understand. So I made my frown a little deeper as I asked, "What kind of musician do you want to be?" He grinned. "How many kinds do you think there are?" "Be serious," I said. He laughed, throwing his head back, and then looked at me. "I am serious." "Well, then, for Christ's sake, stop kidding around and answer a serious question. I mean, do you want to be a concert pianist? You want to play classical music and all that, or what?" Long before I finished, he was laughing again. "For Christ's sake, Sonny," he sobered, but with difficulty. "I'm sorry, but you sound so scared." And he was off again. "Well, you may think it's funny now, baby, but it's not going to be funny when you have to make your living at it. Let me tell you that." I was furious because I knew he was laughing at me, and I didn't know why. "No," he said, very sober now, and afraid perhaps that he had hurt me. "I don't want to be a classical pianist. That isn't what interests me. I mean," he paused, looking hard at me, as though his eyes would help me to understand, and then gestured helplessly, as though perhaps his hand would help. "I mean, I'll have a lot of studying to do, and I'll have to study everything, but I mean, I want to play with jazz musicians." He stopped. "I want to play jazz," he said. Well, the word had never before sounded as heavy as real as it sounded that afternoon in Sonny's mouth. I just looked at him, and I was probably frowning, a real frown by this time. I simply couldn't see why on earth he would want to spend his time hanging around nightclubs, clowning around on bandstands while people pushed each other around a dance floor. It seemed beneath him somehow. I'd never thought about it before. I'd never been forced to, but I suppose I'd always put jazz musicians in a class with what Daddy called good time people. "Are you serious?" "Hell yes, I'm serious." He looked more helpless than ever and annoyed and deeply hurt. I suggested helpfully, "You mean like Louis Armstrong?" His face closed as though I'd struck him. "No, I'm not talking about none of that old time down home crap." "Well, look, Sonny, I'm sorry. I don't get mad. I don't altogether get it. That's all. Name somebody you know, a jazz musician you admire." "Bird." "Who?" "Bird. Charlie Parker. Don't they teach you nothing in the goddamn army?" I lit a cigarette. I was surprised and then a little amused to discover that I was trembling. "I've been out of touch," I said. "You'll have to be patient with me. Now, who is this Parker character?" And it's a great moment because, of course, what Baldwin is doing is presenting the period of jazz that Sonny is interested in, and that's the bebop. Charlie Parker, the great, brilliant saxophonist, who transformed jazz musician and really transformed music. Charlie Parker also was a heroin addict, and suffered many issues and so on, but was one of the great musicians. So there's an interesting way in which the music that Sonny is interested in is the new kind of jazz. It's a jazz of improvisation. It's a jazz that is becoming what would be now would then be called the classic American music. It's a jazz in which it's constructed around a form, a theme, a musical theme that is then improvised by different musicians who come together to create something that is composed, sophisticated, and complex, and yet it's something that is done new every day and every moment. There's a difference between there's this divide, of course, between the two brothers on the question, and in a sense they never quite reconcile that moment until the end of the story, and reconcile themselves to solve this problem that they face until the end of the story. Yet in the middle of it, there's also that moment when both of them are watching a gospel singer singing a Negro spiritual, and both of them have this moment of revelation and epiphany, of recognizing that something magical has happened in that moment, and they could both understand this, and this was very strange, certainly strange to Sonny's brother.